The Indiana Fever are standing on the edge of a decision so dangerous, so deceptively emotional, and so potentially franchise-destroying that if they make the wrong move, they won't just lose flexibility. They could slam shut their own championship window before it ever truly opens. This is not just about one player. This is not just about loyalty. This is not just about keeping a familiar face in the locker room so fans can feel comfortable and sentimental for another few months. No. This is about whether the Fever front office has the nerve, the intelligence, and the cold-blooded executive discipline to separate emotional attachment from championship mathematics. Because right now, one of the biggest traps in all of women's basketball is being disguised as a feel-good move. Casual fans see points per game, they see flashy shot-making, they see a recognizable name, and they immediately panic at the thought of change. They scream that Kelsey Mitchell must be retained at all costs. They act like letting her leave would be front office malpractice. They treat her departure like the collapse of civilization. But that reaction is driven by emotion, not structure. It is driven by surface-level fandom, not championship architecture. And if Indiana allows itself to be manipulated by that noise, if it caves to the pressure and hands over a massive Supermax-style bag just to avoid online outrage, then the Fever may be making one of the most expensive mistakes of the new WNBA era. Because this isn't the old league anymore. The economics have changed. The stakes have changed. The salary cap environment has changed. Expansion is here. The market is about to become vicious. And every front office that doesn't understand how to build intelligently is going to get swallowed alive by the new financial reality. This is where smart franchises separate themselves from emotional ones. This is where dynasties are either built in silence or destroyed in applause. And if Indiana is serious about maximizing the prime years of Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston, then they cannot afford to think like fans. They have to think like predators. They have to think like executives staring at a war map, not a highlight reel. Because the truth is brutal. You do not spend an elite percentage of your cap on offensive volume that doesn't fully amplify your franchise engine. You do not commit premium capital to a style that risks slowing down the very machine you are trying to unleash. Caitlin Clark is not just another great player. She is not simply a star guard. She is an offensive ecosystem. She is a pace detonator. She is a spacing manipulator. She is a defensive stress test. She is a full-court weapon who turns ordinary possessions into panic attacks for opponents. Every roster move Indiana makes from this point forward has to answer one question and one question only. Does this player make the Clark-Boston core more devastating, more efficient, more balanced, more dangerous, and more sustainable over an entire season and playoff run? If the answer is not a screaming yes, then sentiment must die immediately. And this is where the Kelsey Mitchell conversation gets uncomfortable for a lot of people, because while she can absolutely score and while she has absolutely had huge moments, the Fever cannot allow box score loyalty to blind them to structural truth. Points are not the whole story. Raw scoring does not automatically equal irreplaceable value. Shot creation alone is not the same as championship fit. And if Indiana pays as if it is, then they are not rewarding production, they are purchasing inflexibility. They are buying a cap trap wrapped in nostalgia. They are paying luxury pricing for a roster imbalance they can no longer afford. The new WNBA economy is unforgiving. One oversized contract in the wrong place can quietly poison your entire team-building timeline. One emotional overpay can kill your wing depth, compromise your perimeter defense, weaken your bench, limit your adaptability, and leave you entering a brutal season with a roster that looks good in graphics and sounds good in interviews but physically breaks down when it matters most. And that is exactly the danger here. Because if Indiana throws a monster number at Mitchell, they aren't just paying for her, they are sacrificing options. They are sacrificing defenders. They are sacrificing lineup versatility. They are sacrificing the exact kind of role-player infrastructure that championship teams are built on. Suddenly, keeping a player like Lexi Hull becomes more difficult. Suddenly, retaining a tone setter like Sophie Cunningham becomes harder. Suddenly, your ability to patch weaknesses disappears. Suddenly, you are one injury, one slump, one bad matchup away from collapse. And that is how championship windows die, not in one dramatic explosion, but in a series of emotionally popular decisions that quietly bleed your roster dry. That is why the smartest move available to Indiana may also be the most unpopular one. Let her walk. Yes, it sounds brutal. Yes, it sounds cold. Yes, the internet will lose its mind. But banners are not won by fan comfort. They are won by ruthless clarity. The Fever do not need to replace one player with one player. That is where weak front offices fail. They panic and chase names instead of solving problems, but elite executives understand a truth that casual viewers never do: you do not replace 20 points with one contract. You replace them with ecosystem efficiency, with role optimization, with pace enhancement, with defensive balance, with lineup chemistry, and with multiple players whose collective impact creates more winning than one expensive scorer ever could. That is where the Real heist begins. That is where Indiana can steal the entire offseason if they have the courage to do it. Instead of walking into free agency like desperate tourists trying to buy another luxury label just to say they stayed expensive, the Fever should walk in like disciplined operators hunting value in the most efficient aisle of the market. Not the overhyped top shelf. Not the bargain bin desperation pile. The middle class. The killers who fit. The players who don't need the ball to matter. The players who defend, sprint, rotate, shoot, cut, close, communicate, and survive playoff basketball. That is the blueprint. That is the formula. That is the move that could turn Indiana from exciting to terrifying. Because if the Fever truly understand what Caitlin Clark needs around her, then this offseason should not be about preserving the past, it should be about constructing the most lethal version of the future. And that future does not belong to teams that overpay for emotion. It belongs to teams that weaponize every dollar with surgical precision, every roster spot with purpose, and every possession with ruthless intent. Indiana is not one emotional contract away from a title. Indiana is one brutally intelligent offseason away from becoming a problem the entire league cannot solve, and once you accept that truth, once you strip away the fan sentiment, the social media pressure, the name recognition, and the fear of backlash, the path forward becomes almost frighteningly obvious, because there is a real chance the Indiana Fever can pull off the most devastating 3-for-1 roster transformation in the WNBA if they stop thinking like a team trying to survive headlines and start thinking like a team trying to bury the league. This is where the conversation gets lethal. Because the real power of letting Kelsey Mitchell walk is not just the money you avoid spending, it is the strategic violence of what that money can become once it is redistributed into the exact kinds of players who make Caitlin Clark's universe more explosive. Instead of pouring a massive percentage of your cap into one high-cost offensive profile, you spread that capital across multiple highly specific, highly functional, high-synergy pieces that attack your weaknesses and multiply your strengths. That is not losing talent. That is re-engineering your roster into something far more dangerous. Imagine what happens if Indiana stops chasing emotional continuity and starts hunting tactical perfection. Suddenly, the conversation is not about replacing a scorer, it becomes about building a machine. A machine that runs harder, defends longer, spaces cleaner, survives deeper, and punishes opponents for 40 minutes instead of relying on top-heavy shot-making to rescue structural flaws. This is where names like Bridget Carlton become incredibly important. Not because she is louder. Not because she is flashier. Not because she dominates debate shows. But because she fits the exact architecture Indiana should be obsessed with. She is the kind of player championship teams quietly steal while everyone else is distracted by bigger names and bigger contracts. She brings size, discipline, spacing, maturity, defensive reliability, and the kind of off-ball intelligence that makes stars more dangerous instead of more burdened.